Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well as always. In this video, I have a story from New Zealand and a story from Australia, so pull up a stump for those. And yeah, let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. So I've got Maori, native New Zealander blood, and I went to a family gathering around Christmas when I was younger. The family being on my mother's side, which is where I get the Maori blood from. This gathering was way up in North New Zealand, which is mostly just Maori land and as rural as all hell. And if you're in doubt of how rural it is, then no joke, when me and my family pull up to the farm that is being held on, there's a boar on a spit, and some of the uncles, adults are just called aunties and uncles, had caught earlier in the day using spears and knives. Anyway, so there's this creek or stream that runs through the property, which the kids went down to and swam in most days. A lot of the time, we'd all let ourselves float down a while on inflatables or just lay down and let the current take us. And at one point, on the bank on the farm side was about 2 meters high or so, but there was a small ledge about halfway down that you could get down to from the top, but not the bottom. Me and two other boys reckoned it would be a brilliant idea to use that ledge for eeling. We told the adults and they just shrugged and told us, yeah, knock yourselves out. So me and these two guys, we go to this ledge a ton, using both hand casters and having fun just chilling in this picturesque place, surrounded by rolling hills, green fields, and bushland. Us three boys even found a cool place further down the stream that no one else went to, where only we would hang. But then it got weird. A few times out swimming, all the kids got a little anxious, and there was a couple times that we could swear that we saw a figure standing on the far bank as we floated down the stream. It got to the point where me and the two guys were out eeling. We hadn't caught anything so far, which was weird because this stream should have been essentially untouched, and we saw a shadowy figure step out and walk toward us on the opposite bank, and then it began walking on the water. Of course, we absolutely shit ourselves and book it out of there. I remember being in just total terror and the feeling of dread. We told some of the elders or adults about this, and they seemed a little concerned, even when they dismissed it as it was probably just the farmer from next property. But unless that farmer was Jesus from the Shadow Realm, I don't buy that at all. Anyway, us boys had only been eeling during the daylight hours, and we wanted to go out at night because that's the best time to catch eels. One of the other cousins, in their early 20s, said that he'd come along, and about 6 girls begged to come along too. So 10 or so people go out at night to catch some eels, all crammed onto this tiny ledge, and we're there for a few hours, the girls complaining about being bored, while us boys told them to just shut up, worried that they'll scare off the eels. That's when one of the girls gets a tug on her line, a tug that nearly pulled her off the ledge and into the inky black waters beneath us. The older cousin grabs on and starts pulling the line. He's digging his feet in and struggling. Me and the other two boys grab on too, all trying to yank this line up, thinking that we just hit the jackpot. A couple minutes go by when we get some progress, slowly pulling the line in. One of the girls turns on a light, but that's all over the place because they're all screaming and freaking out and stuff like that. But I noticed something really long and thick being pulled out of the water, with no indication of ending. An immense eel head eventually crests the ledge. This thing was huge. It was so thick, and this thing is a meter out of the water and still looks to have most of its body in there. But this thing's head is only over the ledge for a couple seconds when it lets out a roar, a little like a dog bark, but way louder, and then the line snaps as it slides back over the edge and splashes into the water. We're stunned, and an older cousin tells us that we all have to go back right now, so we all just quickly walk back through the dark, a little disappointed but also frightened. We swim in that creek, and that giant eel that roars lives in there? When we got back and told the elders about our story, with them nodding and wowing, but they didn't seem too surprised and actually seemed a little relieved, but told us that we weren't to eel in the stream anymore. And after that, we didn't see the shadow man again, but not long before my family left whilst out swimming, I felt something thick and slimy past my leg when we were near the ledge, and looking back on it, I'm convinced as to what that eel was. In Maori legend or folklore, there's a creature called the Taniwha, which is a guardian of certain areas in nature, or is a guardian for tribes and sub-tribes, in which case this is called a kotiaki, guardian. They generally take the form of sharks if in the sea, or an eel in freshwater. I think that the elders were concerned that the shadow man was an evil spirit or a ghost, and they made an offering or summoned the Taniwha or kotiaki to protect us kids, and that eel was giving us a warning, specifically that bark. Other stories I've heard about the Taniwha have mentioned the roaring sound as well. I want to go back there in a couple of years and try and make an offering. Even if it isn't a Taniwha, it's just an eel, and that thing has to be about 80 to 100 years old to be that big, and I figure that deserves at least some respect. So I was around 13 or 14 when this happened. My mom is a support worker slash care slash community helper, etc. sort of deal. She tells me one day that I'm going with her to this Aboriginal community get-together slash meetup. Now at the time I protest because I just wanted to stay home and play video games, but I didn't have a choice apparently. On the drive out there, for the first time in my life, I realized just how serene that the outback can be. It's like a tranquility achieved kind of feeling. So we eventually get to the area, and it's like this campsite with some built-up modern little motel rooms slash cabins, but it's obviously really remote. Basically, we do normal setup and campsite stuff for the day. I learned some good outback advice from some younger guys that like to camp out there. They teach me definitely what not to eat, touch, and do in a remote situation like this. And for me, it was like the tutorial in one of my video games, so I was all for it. The smiles dropped from their faces, though, as they looked me straight in the eye and told me the most important information for being out here is to be told by the elder tonight. The sudden change in demeanor kind of takes me off guard, so I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'll wait till then. That was some spooky stuff, so I told my mom, and she told me that it was probably worthwhile to have a listen and decide for myself, as they are connected to this land spiritually in a way that we probably don't really get. So dinner rolls around eventually, and at first I'm thinking like, oh, this food's gonna be terrible, I just want spaghetti bog or something. But as it turns out, they have made some kangaroo stew and fresh dampier, which to this day is some of the best campfire grub I've ever had, and I go back for seconds because I was a fat kid at the time. We eat and talk around the campfire, little groups of conversations at first, and then the elder starts to gradually take the point of conversation. She tells us dreamtime stories of how everything came to be and how their people listened to what is and was not heard and not seen. She eventually broaches the topic of spirits and just how important they are and how they are equal to the living in every way and must be respected. She goes on to say that whether the spirits are good or bad, they are integral to the way of life, as there is much to learn from these spirits. She explains that spirits are drawn to intense emotions and feelings, whatever end of the spectrum, I guess you could say. She tells us that the living, in particular, with intense readings, can be targets for these spirits, good or bad. Sometimes, though, When life is lost too soon, spirits can return or linger. She used a native word for this, and the guy sort of scrunched his forehead trying to translate that word for her, so I assume it's return or linger or something to that effect. In particular, in the time of need, they can appear as guides for the living to show the way forward. Now at this point, I'm completely enthralled. Call it how you want, but she was very passionate about the land and her stories, and they were very interesting too. But what she said next really took me out of this trance. I noticed that she's now looking at me, but honestly it felt like she was looking at my mind or my soul. To this day, no one has ever struck me that same way, that same feeling. She eyes me for a few more seconds and looks above my left shoulder and my right shoulder, but not above me. She says, "Not everything we have lost is gone, but closer to us at every level that very few can perceive. Open your heart, and the goodness is there, and it will be for all to see." And I thought that it was weird how she looked above my shoulders because I have two dead brothers, but that comes later. Everyone was just listening to her and trying not to make eye contact with me at the same time. She bows her head down as if what she did took effort. And she says, "We had a good night tonight with some tucker, and I hope everyone had a good time. There is only one thing you have to do tonight." Her smile faded and she looked at everyone before staring at me again with that soul-piercing gaze. "Do not go outside tonight." What she said next was a rough translation, but it was something akin to, "Your resting place is safe, and I have made sure that you won't come to harm. But that is if you act in according to our laws and respect to our spirits." Now at this point, I am getting really creeped the hell out, and I have seen enough horror movies to know how this ends. She stands up with the vigor of a 23-year-old, and this is an extremely old elder, remember. She smiles as if she didn't just spend the last 15 minutes warning us that the spirits were going to tear us a new butthole if we went outside tonight. My mom and I go off to our little cabin and decide to get some sleep. I get a chance to ask her, though, before what she thought. She frowned and said, no matter what I believed, I should stay inside as a sign of respect, that no matter what I thought, they would be deeply offended if I went out. And I asked her, "But did you believe them?" She said, "Just because you don't understand how some things work in the world, honey, it doesn't mean that they aren't real or aren't there." And I say, "So that's a yes?" And she says, "Go to bed. I think we've both heard enough stories tonight." In the cabin, there were two singles, and unfortunately, they were uncomfortable as hell, but I slept on the one closest to the door, along with some other lightly furnished stuff, like 2 chairs that were both facing their backs to the windows. So I'm laying there, trying to sleep, and 3 a.m. rolls around, and on the dot, something is wrong here. No, something is very wrong here. Every single one of the hairs on my arms and legs is standing straight as an arrow. I have this clench feeling or a twist in my gut or chest, and at first I think I'm 14 and I'm having a heart attack. As time goes on, it gets worse, and the entrance side of the cabin is getting really, and I mean really cold. For perspective, it was a hot and muggy night in Australia, so even a 5-degree temperature change would have been noticeable. This felt like it was a giant freezer on the other side of the bed. And I, in my head, decide that I should get up and try to see what the hell this is. I felt something different though, from the 2 chairs, slowly but surely, 2 warm auras almost. Feelings? I don't know. I start to hear this low moaning and wind gushes of just this awful, and I mean awful, wailing. I try to block my ears, but my chest, I could feel it reverberating through it, so I man up and I get out of bed. I put my ear to the door, and the best way that I could describe what I was hearing was a soul being sundered in two, and in the same nanosecond being stitched back together. What I heard was the pain of that if it happened to a person, and that's just one. What I heard in total around the cabin was like a miasma of them. I step back and I prepare myself for a big nuts moment and go for the handle. The two auras that I mentioned are now on each side of me, and with senses that I can't name or even describe, I saw them, or better yet, perceived them. They were both golden in this warm yellow light that I maybe saw for just a second. One held my arm from going to the door handle, and the other one held my shoulder. Nothing needed to be said, but deep down inside I was told to not open that door. It was almost like I needed confirmation that I wouldn't be screwed up by something on the other side of that door. I suddenly feel this soothing feeling, like as long as I listen, everything will be fine. So I back away from the door, and I go back into bed and try to get some sleep. They are still there, but along with the auras that were fronting the storm. But now 3:33 rolls around, and it's gone. The sounds go away from the door, along with that bone-chilling cold. For only a few seconds, the auras lingered, but in a way that made me feel safe, like they had to leave. I sleep like a baby moments after. I wake up the next morning and go to the campfire, and there's the elder. It's only the two of us. I don't look at her at first, I just sit down, but eventually look and she's smiling ear to ear, almost proud even. She says, "I'm glad you listened to them. They are always close." I'm tearing up at this point because I can't even get the words out. I say, "Was it them?" And she says, "They love you very much." She points to her left and right shoulders and then smiles back at me. I thanked her, and I went back to the cabin in tears. I told my mom years later, and she just smiled, not a word. If you really enjoyed that story like I did, I think that you should go and watch my other video from Oklahoma about the Osage ghost storms, because it sounds kind of familiar in that sense. Well, you don't have to. I recommend that you do, because it's one of my videos, But anyways, I hope you enjoyed those stories, and you can tell me what you thought of them down in the comments below. And yeah, there's links in the description if you want to support the channel. And yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching.